This happened about 2 months ago. I was heading out to meet a guy for our first date and super excited about it. Since it was a first date, I was dressed a bit more provocatively than normal, but for me, that just means a fitted, slightly low-cut shirt with black pants. Anyway, I requested the Uber, and when the car got there, I opened the back door to get in the back, which I almost always do. However, the driver insisted that I sit up front, even after I politely tried to decline. He put his hand out to stop me from getting in the back, and literally insisted that I sit up front. That was the first red flag. When I turned to sit down, I saw in my periphery that he had his hand on the seat, waiting for me to sit on it. I managed to sit as far away from him as possible to avoid it, and he withdrew his hand. I was pretty creeped out by this point, so I pulled out my phone and immediately started texting my cousin, telling her what happened and to keep talking to me. He then started asking me questions, starting with where I was going. I told him I was on my way to a date and was really looking forward to it, thinking this would make him leave me alone. He looked me up and down and said, "Really? You're not married? When I saw you, I thought you were going out and your husband and kids were staying home." Weirdly specific, right? I just said, nope, not married and no kids. That made him start in on me about how I should have children, and that children should be my first priority right now. I tried several times to get off the subject of kids and tried just ignoring him, but nothing worked. Finally, I told him that I wasn't able to have children, thinking that would shut him up. Again, it didn't. That just prompted some extremely invasive questions about my health. I finally just snapped at him and said, "If I try to carry a baby, it will likely kill me, okay?" He just shrugged and told me how I needed to pray harder for God to heal me so that I could have his children, and that he would love to give me all the children I could ever want. He repeatedly reached over as if he was going to touch me, and I recoiled every time and told him how uncomfortable that made me. He apologized, and then started talking about how he couldn't help it because of how amazingly beautiful I was, and that everyone from his country, I want to say Kenya, but it may have been Nigeria, would be in love with me. By this point, I'm getting really nervous because he's acting like he was going to kidnap me or something. I told him that I was talking to my cousin via text, and then called the restaurant and gave my information to put my date and me on the wait list, and also to give them my information in case I didn't show up. This made him quiet down for a few minutes, thankfully. But as we got close to the restaurant, he started saying, "When can I see you again? I don't know when I will see you again, and that makes me sad." I just said, "Well, I guess if I ever end up using Uber again, and you somehow end up as the driver, which is highly unlikely." I didn't want to be too firm because I was frankly scared at that point, and the restaurant was so close that I didn't want to risk pissing him off and making him take off with me. He continued to talk about how upset he was, that he didn't know if he'd ever see me again, and insisted that I do something to make him feel better. Finally, we got within a block of the place, and I unlocked the door and jumped out when he stopped, telling him to leave me the hell alone. He looked furious, but when he reached out, I was already out of the car. Obviously, I contacted Uber and told them everything. He was fired within the hour. They told me that because of their privacy policy, they couldn't tell me exactly what they did to him, but that no one else would ever have to experience that from him ever again. So yeah, he was fired. Now I am always extremely nervous whenever I have to take an Uber, but fortunately I haven't experienced anything like that since. I did end up telling my date about it. He gave me some interesting insight. When I told the driver I was on my way to a date, my thought was that he would back off if he knew that. According to my date and a couple of male friends, that actually just let him know that I was single. It was recommended that I say that I'm married in future creepy scenarios of harassment, although I don't know if that would have stopped it either. This past summer, for my graduation gift, my mom and grandma took me to Alberta to watch the Spruce Meadows Masters Tournament, one of the world's largest horse shows. We flew out there and decided to use Uber to get to and from the showgrounds. We don't have Uber where I'm from, but everyone said the Uber drivers in the area were awesome. For the first 3 days, the drivers were great. They picked us up within 5 or so minutes and got us there in 15 minutes tops. The cars were clean and safe. On day 4, we called for an Uber 45 minutes before we wanted to be picked up at 9:30 a.m. At 10 a.m., the original driver came. In his profile, it said he was driving a 2017 Dodge Journey, but when he got there, it was definitely the right guy. but he was in this old, run-down-looking beater. My first instinct was to go up to the driver window and ask him to roll it down. Before I could ask him his name, just to check and make sure and ask him what happened to the car, the app said he would be driving. He almost shouted at me in a very angry tone, "Yes, I'm John. This is my sister's car. Mine's in the shop. Now get in, ladies. I have other riders waiting." I was shocked and scared, but my mom and grandma said to just get in, so I did. I sat in the back with my grandma, and my mom sat in the front. We told him where we needed to go, and we were on our way. He took a different route that he claimed was quicker. In Calgary, 15 minutes on the highway is already pretty fast. 15 to 20 minutes had passed, and he had been chatting up my mom in a very flirtatious way the whole ride. He took us into the countryside that seemed to be forever away from where we were going, the opposite direction. I asked him if he knew where he was going and if we could get back onto the highway. He ignored me and kept driving. Another 10 minutes passed and I was freaking out. My mom was obviously quite uncomfortable as well, and we were still in the countryside. He pulled over on the side of the road and we just sat there for a solid 5 minutes. At this point, I was shaking and had to hold my grandma's hand. The driver turned around to put his hand on my leg, but I quickly shifted away. Then he looked at all three of us and said, "I'm sorry for the long ride, ladies. I know I've gone out of the way, but you're all too beautiful for me to let you leave so soon." I wanted to get out of the car. We all sat there in silence, and all I could think was, holy fuck, this guy's going to kill us. He made other creepy remarks towards me, commenting on how youthful and full of life I am, some real serial killer stuff. After sitting there in shock for what felt like hours, my sweet, quiet grandma screamed at him, telling him to turn around and get back on the highway. He finally pulled off of the side of the road and continued on the country road. The whole way, he kept looking back at me and making increasingly sexual remarks. About an hour and a half later, we got to the grounds. I was extremely shaken up and almost in tears. I wished we had just called another Uber. I hope he doesn't do this to all his female passengers. I will never be taking a rideshare again. So this happened about 4 months ago, maybe more, but I really don't know for sure. Anyway, I was 19 years old and was going home from university after classes. I usually take my keys with me, but around that time I had lost them, and my mom was yet to take me to get a new copy. I remember I kept insisting, but she wouldn't listen. So what I did was knock on the door to get my younger brother's attention so he'd come and let me in. But my mom also took his keys and just left him there locked up as well. I asked my brother to pass me my charger from my room, and I called one of my aunties to see if I could go hang out at her workplace in the meantime. She said yes, and then told me to call an Uber that she'd be paying for as soon as I got there, and that's what I did. Now, the Uber didn't pick me up exactly at home. It was in the house across the street instead. No special reason, it just did. The moment I saw the guy, he gave me kind of a weird vibe, but I also tend to be paranoid every time I so much as hop on a taxi, so I just got in, rolled down the window and kept a grip on both of my phones. It all seemed relatively normal until we got to the area where my aunt's workplace was. He just completely drove past it and claimed he was following the GPS when I asked him about it, but he wouldn't let me see said GPS. He seemed to know exactly where he was going. Now, I was kinda doomed from the beginning because I don't know directions, and I could only rely on the driver being a decent person and recognizing the area, which I did. But wherever he was taking me, I had no idea. I remember seeing this fountain that I could recognize from when Mom drove to my uncle's place, but that was way farther away from my aunt's place. By now I was kind of thinking of what to do because this guy drove past a lot of empty housings, and a couple of them even seemed to be still under construction. Then he stopped near a place that looked like the end of civilization. We were literally on a hill, and then he turned off the car. I got lucky in so many ways, looking back on it. My phone had no credit. As soon as I thought of that, my aunt called me and asked, "Where are you?" And I literally felt my heart drop because I had no idea, and this dude was just staring at me. I said I didn't know and asked him, "Hey, where did you take me?" And he replied with, "I wouldn't know what to tell you, kid." That was enough for me. I grabbed my backpack and opened the door real quick with a loud, "That's fine, I'll see myself out," and hauled ass like I hadn't in a very long time. I remember even being afraid of carrying my backpack on the back in case he'd chase me and pull on it, so I was holding it in my hand with my hoodie wrapped around my waist as I thought of where to hide. I thought of knocking on someone's door, but for some reason, that didn't seem safe to me at the moment. I remember telling my aunt not to hang up because he was still following me in the car. Then I saw an empty barren surrounded by concrete walls and a strong bar gate, except there was enough space under the gate to crawl in, so I literally threw the backpack and then crawled under. There was a huge electric control box, and I crouched inside and hid, my aunt still on the phone. She, my other aunt, and my uncle were all on a call with each other, putting credit on my phone and asking for my live location through WhatsApp because I had no idea where I was, literally in the middle of nowhere. I waited there for like 2 hours, and this guy wouldn't leave. I even had to go pee outside the box and immediately ran back inside. There were even tiny spiders and old honeycombs, so I was also fighting both my arachnophobia and trypophobia. At some point, I'm guessing the guy left, and my uncle got there in his truck. He didn't know where I was, so he kept honking and telling me to tell him when I could hear it closer. And then I finally did and got out. For a while, I thought maybe this had been a misunderstanding, and I just jumped out of some guy's car like a maniac without even paying him. But then, when I got home after staying at my aunt's pharmacy for a while until my mom, who still didn't know much about what had happened, picked me up, and I checked the Uber app, and not only did it say I had already paid, but it also said I made it to my destination, so I ruled that out. I had told my aunts not to tell Mom about it because she goes insane at the minor inconvenience, so telling her this would only freak her out, and she wouldn't be any help. I only let her know when I called her to come get me and on our way to get a copy of that key, because of course, something bad had to happen until she actually listened to me, and nowadays she always puts credit on my phone.